Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most wild periods in human history, the early 20th century. I mean, think about it. It was this age of just incredible progress, but at the very same time, terrifying regress. And to help us make sense of it all, we're going to use the literature of the time as our guide.
Okay, so how did this all happen? How did things unravel so spectacularly? Well, we're going to trace the story through these 5 key stages. We'll start with the collapse of the old certainties and watch as this brand new, and often bewildering, modern world rises from the ashes.
So just to set the scene here, let's talk about the speed of this change. It was just insane. The world of 1950, it was almost unrecognizable to someone from 1900. Think about that. In just one person's lifetime, humanity went through more upheaval than in maybe the previous 1,000 years put together. It's just staggering.
And all that upheaval, it created the central paradox of the whole era. It's like, for every giant leap forward humanity took, it felt like we were taking a catastrophic step backward. And the crazy part is, this wasn't happening one after the other. No, progress and regress were happening at the exact same time. It was a complete contradiction.
So, what's really fascinating here is that both of these opposing forces, this creation and destruction, they came from the same place, the scientific revolution. I mean, take the internal combustion engine. On one hand, you've got the motor car, giving millions of young people this incredible newfound freedom. But then, that exact same engine also powered the airplane, which became this devastating new instrument of mass slaughter in 2 world wars. One source, 2 completely, profoundly different outcomes. Wild, right?
Okay, so to really truly get the shock of this new world, you got to understand the world it completely shattered. Because before all the chaos of the 20th century, you had this feeling of incredible stability, the Victorian age. And this really shows you the complete 180 in thinking. You know, the Victorians, they believed in permanence, they accepted authority, they basically wanted to affirm the world as it was. But the 20th century mindset, the polar opposite. It saw a world that was always changing, it rebelled against any and all authority, and it wanted to question, well, absolutely everything.
And they really truly believed their world was the final version. I mean, these key institutions, the family, the government, the empire, religion, these weren't just seen as things that could change. No way. They were seen as permanent, unshakable pillars of civilization. They were built to last forever.
So, how did this supposedly eternal world just fall apart? Well, once the questioning started, those unshakable foundations started to look a whole lot like sand.
It was just one powerful shock after another hitting the old world. First, you've got technology, giving young people mobility and freedom like never before. Then you have art. Playwrights like George Bernard Shaw were basically putting society's most cherished moral beliefs on trial, right there on stage. And then came the wars. 2 massive global conflicts that didn't just shatter the old order. They introduced the very real, terrifying possibility of total human annihilation.
And a guy like Shaw, he was a total lightning rod for this shift. His plays, his writings, they were like a trumpet call to just challenge everything. I love this line from his character Andrew Undershaft, who basically asks, hey, why are we so quick to scrap our old machines, but we won't scrap our old morals? And that way of thinking, that urge to question everything, it just spread like wildfire.
But you have to imagine what that actually felt like for people. It wasn't all just liberating, right? For a lot of folks, it was absolutely terrifying. It's like what Shaw's other character, Barbara, says. It felt like the very ground beneath your feet, that solid rock of faith, tradition, certainty, was just dissolving into nothing.
So with this common foundation gone, this kind of spiritual vacuum opens up, and that creates this huge split in the world of literature. Because suddenly, the big question for every single artist was, okay, who am I even writing for anymore?
And pretty quickly, 2 clear camps emerged. You had the old guard on one side, writers like Shaw, H.G. Wells. They believed in art for life's sake. They were writing to engage with society's problems, writing for the common person. But then you add the new guard, people like James Joyce and T.S. Eliot. They championed art for art's sake, and they retreated into this really complex, challenging work that was pretty much only for a small, highly educated intellectual elite.
And 1922 was a real landmark year for this. This is the crucial point. You get the publication of 2 monumental, and let's be honest, really difficult works, Joyce's Ulysses and Eliot's The Wasteland. And with them, high literature takes this deliberate turn away from the general public. It became esoteric.
A word that basically means it's intended for and probably only understood by a small number of people with very specialized knowledge. And this just created a huge gulf between those cutting-edge artists and the average, intelligent reader.
And what's more, the new intellectuals, they defended this divide fiercely. They had this almost aristocratic pride about it. T.S. Eliot wrote that this split between elite literature and common life wasn't a failure. No, it was a necessary principle of disorder. That attitude, it's rooted in this pretty clear contempt for what they saw as the half-educated masses.
But here's the kicker. While all the critics and the avant-garde intellectuals are celebrating this new, difficult literature, something else is happening in the bookshops. A novel called The Forsyte Saga by John Galsworthy, very much in that older tradition, was quietly heading towards its 50th printing. Talk about a disconnect. It was a massive sign that what the critics were pushing and what the public was actually reading were two totally different things. And all of this was happening just as a whole new kind of society was being born. Because at the very same moment that high art was becoming more and more elite, the rest of society was being completely reorganized on a scale never seen before. It was becoming the age of the masses.
So how did this happen? Well, the process kind of started with ideas from groups like the Fabian Society. You can think of them as a think tank pushing for socialist change, but through slow, gradual reform, not, violent revolution. Then, researchers like the Webbs took those ideas and built this whole detailed intellectual framework around them. And the end result? The welfare state. A huge, vast administrative machine designed for the material benefit of millions. But, and this is a big but, it often treated unique, individual human beings like they were just interchangeable parts in a giant system.
And this brand new society, it brought a whole host of consequences nobody really saw coming. Mass production? Well, that basically led to the death of individual craftsmanship. You had this powerful new advertising culture popping up to make sure everyone kept buying stuff. You had new forms of youth rebellion, like the Beatniks, showing up in protest. And the really ironic part? That conspicuous waste that people used to criticize the rich for, it suddenly became a common habit for pretty much all classes. Advertising, especially, became this incredibly powerful new force. It wasn't just about describing how good a product was anymore. Oh no. It started using depth psychology to create these automatic emotional responses in us. It was all about subtly forging these connections in our minds between our deepest human desires, like love, and all these mass-produced consumer goods.
And you know what else got hit? Even satire. Satire was historically this really powerful tool for correcting society's flaws, but it got degraded. It was cheapened for mass consumption. It became less about smart, intelligent critique and more about just simple, witless ridicule, which, hey, is always a guaranteed recipe for popularity with an audience that just wants a cheap laugh at someone else's expense. Which really leaves us with the central, nagging question that came out of this whole tumultuous period. When you tear down the old house of tradition, morality, and authority, what do you build in its place? That was the massive challenge facing the modern world. And honestly, it's a question we are still trying to answer today. And you have to ask yourself, are we any closer to figuring it out?